When you pay close attention to the night sky, doesn't it look so busy? It's full of stars, and some of these are bright, some of these are dim, some of them look big, some of them look small, some look close, some look far, and some of them form shapes together. We call these shapes constellations, and every constellation has a story behind it. I hope that you plan to go out stargazing soon, and when you do, see if you can spot these stories I'm about to tell you. In the late summertime, you can see 4 stars that form a body with a 5th star forming a tail. We call this constellation Delphinus, and this is the story of how a dolphin came to be in the stars. A long time ago in ancient Greece, there was a young man named Arion. Arion was a poet, a singer, a musician, and he wandered from city to city playing his lyre and singing songs. Everyone always stopped when they heard him sing because his voice was the most beautiful one they had ever heard. One day, Arion heard of a competition happening at a music festival in Sicily. The first prize was a huge bag of gold. Arion wasted no time packing his lyre and setting sail on a ship bound for Sicily. Now he would pass the time by, of course, playing his lyre and practicing his music. Now the ship's crew didn't really pay much attention to him, but every time Arion would sit on the prow of the ship and play his lyre, dolphins would begin to flip around in the water, following the ship, listening to Arion's song. They would follow the ship for miles and miles and miles, listening and listening. This happened every day, until finally Arion reached Sicily and waved goodbye to the sea and to his dolphins. When Arion arrived at the festival in Sicily, he saw that all the best musicians in the world had gathered. Beautiful music filled the air. People were playing day and night, one after another. They took their place on the stage, and they filled the world with song. Arion was entranced. When his turn came, Arion strode onto the stage, picked up his lyre, and he sang so beautifully that everyone fell silent. The king himself requested an encore, and after Arion had finished playing his final song, the king stepped onto the stage and awarded him first prize. When it came time to leave Sicily, hundreds of admirers gathered around, offering him jewels and gold and sweets and treasures to stay. "Oh, please," they begged him, "please stay in Sicily, play with us forever. We love to hear your voice." But Arion shook his head. "If I stayed here, I would miss my home too much. But I promise I will come and visit." Arion got onto the ship and waved farewell until the port disappeared from view. He turned and headed towards his cabin to get some rest, but the moment he turned around, he saw the ship's crew gathered, angry, snarling, and trapping him in place. "That's an awful lot of gold you're carrying there," said the ship's captain. "Far too much for a little man like you to handle." "We should help him with that," said a crewman. The captain and his crew laughed, pulling out these sharp knives and circling around Arion. Arion was starting to panic. All right, you can have the gold. Just please leave me alone." "You're too generous," said the captain. "Oh, you will take your gold, but you know we can't let you go. As soon as we arrive into port, you are going to turn us in. No, we're going to take your gold and your little lyra, and then we are going to kill you." Now Arion was beside himself. He begged and begged the captain and his crew not to kill him, But they only laughed and stomped their feet and flashed their knives. They were going to kill him. And even worse, they were going to take his lyre. Arion saw that all was lost. But maybe, just maybe, he had an idea. He sank onto his knees and looked up at the captain. Since I know you will kill me, please allow me one last wish. I would like to sing a final song before I die. The captain looked down at him with his cold eyes, and Arion was afraid he was going to refuse, but at long last, the captain nodded. All right, one last song, and as soon as you play your last note, Arion climbed to the prow of the ship, looked out over the sea he so loved. He strummed some notes on his lyre and began to sing, and his voice, now filled with sadness, was more beautiful than it had ever been. He sang and sang, and when he reached his last note, he jumped from the ship into the sea, leaving a surprised crew behind. Now he was bobbing in the choppy seawater, and all of a sudden he felt a swell beneath him, and he was lifted up above the waves on the back of a dolphin. A pod of dolphins had gathered yet again to hear Arion's song, and when he leapt into the water, they swam into action to save their favorite singer. One of the dolphins carried Arion onto her back, while the others swam next to them, and in this formation, they swam until they reached the shore way, way ahead of the ship. Now, Arion didn't have his gold anymore, but he was still alive, he had his lyre, and he had his dolphins. And as a reward for this heroic act, Zeus, the king of all the Greek gods, gave the dolphins their own space in the stars, and this is the constellation Delphinus. After this, Arion traveled from city to city, playing for kings and peasants. Everyone who heard him always gathered to listen, and every time he sang, the dolphins gathered near the shore to hear his songs. There are some constellations that we can't see in North America. One of them is called the Southern Cross, a group of 4 stars that form the shape of a cross. You can see it from the southern hemisphere, where it's used in navigation, much like Polaris, the bright North Star, is used here in the northern hemisphere. This constellation is also called the Giraffe. Long ago, when the world was still young, the sky was just beginning to fill with stars, and the sun, who was quite new at his job, would move across the sky, sometime getting a little confused and lost along the way. Meanwhile, all the animals on Earth were given a special job to do to help run the world smoothly. Now, their job depended on their skills. For example, the elephants were big and very, very strong, so their job was to build. The lions were fierce with sharp claws, so their job was to guard. Everyone had an important job to do, except for the giraffe. The giraffe wasn't the strongest, wasn't the fastest, wasn't the fiercest, and with its very long neck, there wasn't much the giraffe could do to be useful. And of course, this made the giraffe very, very sad. So he sat and spent his days staring at the sky, watching the sun bump all clumsy across the sky, watching the other animals do their job, and at night he would sit and watch the young stars and wish that he could do something sparkly or useful for the world. As the days went on, the poor giraffe felt sadder and sadder until he realized one day, as he was watching the sun do its little clumsy dance across the sky, that with his long neck, he could actually reach all the way up and help the sun stay on track. And the other animals thought this was a brilliant idea and a perfect job for the giraffe. All day long now, the giraffe stared at the sky, guiding the sun with its long neck and its head. And when the sun started to veer off course or get lost behind a cloud, the giraffe would give it a little bump with its head and help it stay on course. The giraffe did this for so long and did it so well that eventually it took its place among the stars and became a constellation that always points towards the sun. This is why people use the Southern Cross or the giraffe constellation to guide them on their path. And to remember that it doesn't matter if we're not the fastest or the strongest or the fiercest. We all have something that makes us special. Sometimes two constellations combine to create a story of their own. This next story is about two battling creatures in the sky. Canis Major, a legendary dog that always catches its prey, and Canis Minor, a monstrous fox that is so fast it can never be caught by any predator. How did they come to be trapped in the stars forever? Lailaps was an ancient dog. It was so swift it could outrun and catch anything it chased. Its name meant Stormwind, and at first this dog belonged to Zeus. Now, of course, hunters from the earth to the sky longed to own this wonderful dog so that they could use it in their hunts. After a long time, Zeus finally decided to gift this dog to the world of the mortals. It passed hands a few times until it eventually came to be owned by two young hunters, a girl named Procris and her husband, Cephalus. Procris and Cephalus took Lailaps on many hunts, and of course, if either one of them spotted a deer or a rabbit, the moment Lailaps caught its scent, it was off in the woods like a bolt of lightning and always caught whatever it chased. One day, while Cephalus was traveling the land with Lailaps, he arrived in a land where he heard tales of a monstrous fox that was ravaging the countryside. This fox would attack farmers, leaving them with horrible bites, and would devour any animals on their farms. This wasn't just an ordinary fox. It was the Themetian fox, and that, just like Lailaps, it was a legendary creature, one who could not be caught by any man or creature on the entire earth. Hunters from all over the world had been hired to try and catch this fox and end its reign of terror, but no one had even been able to catch up with it, let alone kill it. Even the swiftest and fastest hunting dogs couldn't even get close to it. Now Cephalus, who was a wonderful hunter in his own might, decided to stay and try to help by any means he could. Of course, at his side, Lailaps was already sniffing the air and straining at his leash, but Cephalus decided to try other methods first. At first, he led a band of hunters to place a maze of nets around the farming fields, hoping to tangle the fox inside it, but it was no use. The fast and cunning fox slept over the nets very easily. Next, Cephalus tried setting traps, some with ropes, some with sharp metal teeth, but again, the Themetian fox leapt over them like they weren't even there. A lot of the hunters tried again to unleash their hounds and set it on the fox's trail, but after hours and hours of pursuit at top speed, the hounds limped back home completely out of breath, with nothing to show for their efforts. Now, meanwhile, Lailaps was straining more than ever at his leash, just wanting to run after this fox. And finally Cephalus let it free, and like a bolt of lightning, Lailaps was off, giving chase to the monstrous fox, as though the wind was at the back of his paws. Now Cephalus climbed to a nearby hilltop to watch the scene. He was certain that in no time at all Lailaps would catch up to the fox and bring it down. Yet each time Lailaps caught up to the fox, it would escape. Stride for stride, the dog pressed on, closer and closer, until it seemed, finally, that its nose was just on the fox's tail. Lylapse opened its jaws, ready to snap them shut and bring down the monster fox once and for all. But Lylapse's teeth bit down on empty air as the fox escaped him yet again. But Lylapse wasn't tired, not yet. Again he chased. Minutes turned into hours. Hours turned into days. And still he chased, and still the fox ran, until there was no end in sight. For the dog that always caught what it chased, and the fox that could never be caught by anything. They ran and ran and chased until they ran right off the face of the earth into the sky. And they became stars forever. The big dog, Canis Major, and the little dog, Canis Minor, forever locked in their eternal chase. If you ever spot these two constellations in the sky, you'll notice their chase continues to this day. They are always next to each other, always involved in this battle. Do you think Lylapse will ever catch the Themetian fox? Or will the fox one day run so fast that Lylapse will lose him forever? Keep checking the stars. Maybe we'll find out one day. There is another famous battle written in the stars. You may have heard of a constellation called Orion's Belt. It's one of the more famous ones because it's very, very easy to spot. Look up into the sky for 3 very bright stars in a row. Now these 3 stars form the belt of a hunter named Orion. And if you can find Orion's belt, you can see the rest of the constellation that looks like a man holding a bow and an arrow. So what's Orion doing up in the stars? And did you know there was another constellation chasing him? Now this all began, like so many of these stories do, in ancient Greece. Orion was a great hunter, the greatest one the world had known so far. He was feared by all the beasts of the sea and the sky and the land because he always succeeded in slaying whatever he was hunting. Whether it was a deer, a bear, a fish, or a bird, nothing could escape his bow and arrow. The problem with Orion is that he was also very arrogant. He knew he was the best, and he wanted everyone to know it. In fact, one day he decided to prove it by giving himself a quest to kill every single wild animal on Earth. He told everyone who crossed his path about this quest of his, and he set out to start this hunt. Now Gaia, who was the goddess of the earth, eventually heard about Orion's quest, and you can imagine she wasn't very happy with him. It's one thing to hunt animals for food while still being respectful, but to kill for the sake of killing, she was not going to let that happen. Gaia enlisted the help of a tiny little scorpion and asked him to kill Orion before he could kill every creature on Earth. Now when Orion found this little scorpion on his path, he wasn't scared. First of all, it was tiny. And more importantly, he was Orion, the greatest hunter of all time. If he could handle bears and lions, he could handle one tiny little scorpion. But soon, Orion had a challenge on his hands. No matter how hard he tried to shoot the scorpion with his arrows, the small creature would just jump aside and would let the arrows bounce harmlessly off his hard shell. For the first time, Orion started feeling a little worried. Maybe he even regretted the quest that he'd made for himself, but it was too late. Now he had no choice but to try and fight this little scorpion who was determined to kill him, just like he was determined to kill all animals of the world. He tried throwing heavy stones at the scorpion, but he was too quick. He tried slashing it with a sword, but its shell could not break. He even tried stomping it again and again, and every time the scorpion jumped aside, avoiding Orion's foot, until finally, just as Orion's foot came down again, the scorpion skittered to the side, and quick as lightning, stung Orion's ankle with its poisonous tail. And just like that, Orion, the great hunter who wanted to kill everything on Earth, had been killed by one of the Earth's smallest creatures. And so that the world would never forget Orion's tale, Gaia, who had sent the scorpion to protect the animals, placed Orion's image up into the sky, with the scorpion right next to it. You see, in the wintertime, you can see the constellation of Orion super clear in the sky, but as the season changes into summer, Orion starts to disappear, and then you can see the constellation called Scorpius, which is that little scorpion that brought down the great hunter Orion. As the stars move around in the sky throughout the year, it will always look to us as though the scorpion is chasing Orion. The most wonderful thing about the stars and their stories is that every person on Earth can look up there and see something different. Have you ever seen the constellation called the Big Dipper? Some people don't see a dipper. They see that shape as a chariot or a boat or a shrimp. The Milky Way galaxy gets its name because the ancient Greeks thought that the arrangement of stars looked like a big spray of milk across the sky. In some parts of China, they see a bridge of magpies or a silver river, and some indigenous people of Canada see crystals scattered across the sky by a coyote. The stars belong to everybody, so there are no right or wrong stories about the shapes we can see up there. In fact, while some people see mighty warriors and hunters and fearsome animals, the Norse people saw a toe. Now this story begins like many Norse stories do, with Thor, the god of thunder, fighting some giants, but for once that's not the interesting part of the story. You see, Thor was one day traveling back from Jotunheim, the frozen wasteland, homeland of the frost giants. On this particular quest, he was accompanied by Ervandil, who may have been strong if he was hanging around with Thor, battling some giants, but he still wasn't quite as tough as the god of thunder. On their way out of Jotunheim, Thor and Ervandil came across a poisonous, deathly cold river called Elivagar. By this point in their journey, there was a powerful winter storm that had just started, and Ervandil was already shivering from the intensity of the cold. Now, Ervandil had to get across the river somehow, so Thor, helpful as always, bundled Ervandil up into a basket and hoisted the basket onto his back. That was awfully nice of him, and the basket kept Ervandil protected from the elements, except for one little problem. The basket was a tight fit. Almost all of Ervandil managed to fit inside, except for one of his big toes, which stuck out from a little hole in the basket. Now the rest of Ervandil was toasty warm as Thor marched across the Elivagar River, so neither of them noticed the big toe all alone and exposed to the wicked winter wind. Halfway past the river, the toe began to turn red. 3/4 of the way, the toe began to turn blue. And by the time they got to warmer ground and Thor pulled the basket off his back, the toe had turned black. And Ervandil watched with horror as with a loud clank, dum, 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 the big toe fell right off his foot and rolled its way in front of Thor. Thor picked up the toe. It was black, frozen solid, and as much as Ervandil was feeling panicked about the loss of his toe, there was no way this was going back on his foot. So Thor did what many of us would probably do if we were holding a frozen black broken off toe. He threw it away. But this is Thor we're talking about. So when he threw the toe with all his strength, it went towards the sky, past the birds, past the clouds, past the sky itself, and became trapped in the stars. Now the Norsemen called that little star up there Ervandil's toe, and that frozen and broken toe is probably still up there to this very day. Now the tricky part is that these days no one knows for sure which star, or maybe even which constellation, was called Ervandil's toe. Some people think it may have been Polaris, the North Star, the bright star sailors use for navigation. Maybe it's Rigel, maybe it's Sirius, maybe it's even the Big Dipper. That's the beauty of the stars. There are a million stories, and everyone can find their own if they look up on a clear night. So the next time you're out stargazing, see if you can spot Delphinus, Orion, Canis Major, Canis Minor, and see if you can spot where poor Ervandil's frozen toe ended up. I would love to find out.